I walked into my workshop to find her lounging in my recliner, shoes off, sipping my coffee, and casually scrolling through Pinterest on her iPad like she was staying in some fancy Airbnb. I blinked a couple of times, wondering if I'd somehow wandered into the wrong place, but no, it was definitely my shed, my tools, my bikes, my workbench, and right there was Karen, the vice president of the HOA from 3 streets away, acting like she owned the place. When I asked her what she thought she was doing in my private workspace, she gave me a smile like a mall Santa and said, "Oh, just checking on the property. The HOA thinks the spot might actually be community maintenance." Then she kicked her feet up on my vintage Harley frame like it was a footrest and took another sip. I should have called the cops right then. Instead, I decided to build a barrier around here literally. It all began with a gate, a real, sturdy gate I had installed a few months ago at the far edge of my property. My home sits right on the neighborhood's border, grandfathered in before the HOA took control of the surrounding land. That meant, legally, I wasn't part of their little kingdom, but that didn't stop them from trying to boss me around. The gate was my quiet protest. I was fed up with joggers cutting through my driveway, tired of whole letters complaining about the barn's color, and definitely done with Karen's Saturday morning inspections. So I locked the gate with a keypad and put up a sign, "Private property, no trespassing." Of course, Karen lost her mind. She started with subtle tactics and notes in my mailbox, friendly visits pretending to care about my workshop upgrades. Then came the official notices, none of which applied to me. I ignored every single one, thinking she'd eventually move on to bother someone else's garden. But she found a sneaky path through the woods behind my place and let herself in through my unlocked back door one sunny morning like she was dropping by for coffee and donuts. That day, I'd gone out expecting a peaceful morning sanding down a 1971 Norton Commando. I came back, box of glazed donuts in hand, and almost dropped them when I saw Karen curled up in my recliner. The worst part wasn't just the trespassing, it was the way she acted like I was the rude one. She nodded at the donuts and said, "Oh good, I hope there's enough for both of us." I didn't laugh, I just stared, waiting for her to get up and leave. She didn't budge. I calmly told her this was private property, and she had no right to be there. She tilted her head and replied, "Actually, that's still up for debate. The HOA's legal team is reviewing some documents that say this building might have once been a utility structure for the development. It could be shared space." My blood pressure shot up, but I kept my voice steady. This building never belonged to the HOA. It was built by my grandfather long before the HOA even existed, and it was well within my property lines. I had the deeds, surveys, even the original blueprints to prove it. But Karen wasn't interested in facts, so she was after conquest. She stood up and started pointing around like a realtor showing a rental. "That window's cracked. That bench isn't OSHA compliant. This area should be locked up if it's not in use." She even had the audacity to say I might need to let HOA board members in after hours for emergencies. I asked her what kind of emergency would require them using my welder or sitting in my recliner. She had no answer, just that same smug, power-tripping smile she wore in HOA meetings. I told her flat out to leave, no warnings, no negotiations. Just go. Her smile vanished, replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. She crossed her arms and sat back down, saying she wasn't leaving until the HOA figured it out. I stepped outside to cool off. I thought about calling the cops, but I could already hear how the conversation would go. She'd cry, claim she thought it was public space, maybe accuse me of being hostile. No, I needed a plan she couldn't wiggle out of. Then it hit me. I grabbed my phone and texted Dave, "You still got that leftover brick from the pool house job? Bring it." "And a cement mixer." He replied with a thumbs up and a laughing emoji, asking, "You want me to ask questions now or later?" I said, "Later." Dave and I go way back. He's the kind of guy who doesn't need much explanation when it comes to petty revenge. Once, we built a chicken coop shaped like a tank just to piss off a neighbor who complained about the noise. He owed me one after I helped him cover up when he accidentally drove his skid steer into his brother-in-law's broken bar. Dave owed me a favor from that boat incident, and now it was time to collect. That afternoon, while Karen was still sprawled in my recliner, busy making calls to her home minions, Dave and I got down to business. We didn't say a word to her. No point in starting a fight, I just wanted results. We focused on the front part of the workshop, just past the main door, and marked a straight line about 4 feet back. The plan was simple: build a brand new brick wall to completely seal off the workshop's front. Karen would be left inside a small but livable space, with basic comforts: a power outlets, emergency snacks, a little breathing room, and from the outside, it would look like nothing had changed. I kept cameras rolling the entire time. Documentation was key. Dave was laughing the whole way, spreading mortar like we were constructing the Great Wall of Stupid. Karen caught on around the second row of bricks. She looked up from her iPad and asked, "What are you doing?" I just calmly replied, "Making some adjustments." She scoffed and went back to scrolling. By nightfall, the wall was finished. We left a small vent near the ceiling, made sure she had water, and installed a peephole just for the fun of it. Then we sealed the outer door and stepped back to admire our handiwork. From the street, everything looked untouched. From inside, Karen was now a guest in a tiny, minimalist prison of her own making. I left a note by the vent: "You wanted to stay. Enjoy. I'll check on you tomorrow." That night, I cracked open a beer, put my feet up, and watched the security footage on loop. Her reaction was priceless. At first, she didn't scream or panic. She paced, made calls, tried the door, and when she found it solid, started yelling. I muted the sound. It was more peaceful that way. I knew the cops might show up, but they'd see the footage, the deeds, and the absurdity of her trespassing. And if they didn't, well, I had another plan, a one for later. For now, Karen wanted to claim my space, so I gave it to her brick by brick. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd quietly won a war where the enemy was armed with an iPad and self-importance, and I had bricks, blueprints, and a sense of humor honed by years of HOA headaches. I made strong coffee, grabbed a granola bar, and strolled over to the workshop as casually as if I were checking a Sunday crossword. Through the tiny vent, I heard it, Karen trying to negotiate through clenched teeth. "Hello, hello, I need out now. This is serious. I might sue." I tapped gently on the brick wall and called back, "Good morning, sunshine. How's your stay at Chateau Trespass?" She started with legal threats. "I demand immediate release. This is unlawful confinement. You're violating multiple codes." Then came the guilt trip. "I could have a medical emergency. What if I faint? You'll be liable." Finally, the intimidation. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I didn't respond. No need. The beauty of the wall was that it ended all conversation. She wanted to stay, and now she could enjoy peace and solitude like a monk trapped by her own poor choices. While Karen ranted behind the bricks, I focused on strengthening my defense. This prank wouldn't stay a joke for long. Karen was the type who didn't lose quietly. She'd already left voicemails for half the board, likely twisting the story to sound like I'd locked her in a bunker like some villain from a spy movie. So, I started gathering evidence. The security cameras showed her entering uninvited. They captured me asking her repeatedly to leave. One clip even had her waving off my property deed like it was nothing. Every file was timestamped, backed up to the cloud, and ready for use. I called Dave, still chuckling, and told him to swing by later in case we had to take the wall down under pressure. He promised to bring beers and launch airsa just in case it turned into a full-blown HOA showdown. Meanwhile, I printed 3 copies of my deed, the county assessor's property lines, and the original building permit dating back to my grandfather. This workshop was not HOA property. Not now, not ever. And I intended to make sure that was etched into every HOA record for good. By mid-morning, Karen had gone quiet. I guessed she was finally buried in her phony a broken bar. By midday, I spotted a few cars pulling up, and then the worst-case scenario. A police cruiser rolling to a stop just outside my gate. 2 officers stepped out, looking both curious and worn out. I walked up, coffee still in hand. One of them, Officer Briggs, who gave me a knowing nod. He looked like he'd had his own run-ins with Karen. "You must be the guy with the cement mixer," he said. I grinned and replied, "Technically, that was my buddy's mixer, but yeah, that's me." They asked if someone was inside. I calmly explained the whole situation. How she trespassed, refused to leave, and claimed rights to the property. I handed over the deed, the survey, and a flash drive with all the footage. The younger officer, Ramirez, watched a few clips on his tablet and raised his eyebrows. "You built a whole wall around her?" he asked. I nodded, thought it was fitting. The two officers exchanged looks, trying not to laugh. Briggs sighed. "All right, we'll check on her to make sure she's okay, but from what we're seeing, she might be the one in trouble here." They knocked a few bricks loose near the ventilation opening, just enough to hand her a bottle of water and check she wasn't hyperventilating. She was fine, angry, red-faced, and ready to sue, but physically okay. They escorted her out through the side door I'd purposely left open, just in case things got tricky. Karen didn't even glance my way as she stormed off, iPad gripped like a weapon, muttering threats about lawsuits and reputational damage. I thanked the officers, who chuckled as they walked back to their car. Briggs said, "You'd be surprised how often we deal with her, but you might have set a new record." Once they left, Dave pulled up in his truck. Seeing the missing bricks, he shouted, "Man, you let her out already?" I told him not to worry, the real fun was just starting. We patched the hole with a temporary board in case we needed quick access again. I wasn't sealing anything permanently until I was sure Karen wouldn't try another stunt, and trust me, I knew she would. I spent the rest of the day prepping for the fallout. I backed up every document and even set up a simple website called the Workshop Saga, just in case. Karen thrived on escalation. If intimidation didn't work, she'd move to policy, and if policy failed, she'd play the public opinion card. So I beat her to it. By sundown, the story was already spreading. Someone on the HOA board leaked a screenshot from the security feed showing Karen napping in the recliner while bricks went up behind her. It blew up on a local Facebook group, then a neighborhood Instagram page, and even Reddit. People were losing it. Comments ranged from "that guy deserves a medal" to "I've never wanted to build a wall more in my life." Some even offered to bring bricks for fun. The #workshop Karen started trending locally. Karen, unsurprisingly, did not take this well. The next morning, she posted a 700-word tirade on Nextdoor, accusing me of kidnapping, vandalism, and psychological warfare. She called it an attack on HOA integrity, claiming I'd used emotional manipulation and architectural aggression. My favorite line: "He weaponized bricks against a woman just doing her duty." I screenshotted the whole thing and added it to the website. That evening, the HOA announced an emergency meeting. Of course, I wasn't invited, but I knew exactly what they were hashing out: damage control, how to spin the story, how to stop leaks, and how to figure out if they could still claim my property as community space without looking insane. But none of that mattered, because my next move was about to flip the whole board. I went to the back of the workshop, past the old tool cabinets, and opened a locked drawer holding a folder I'd been saving for the perfect moment. Inside were the closing papers for the adjacent lot of the one right behind the HOA office building. I'd quietly bought it 6 months earlier, just before the HOA renewed. I had recently uncovered something pretty interesting. The HOA's server room, copier, and records area were actually built partially over the property line onto the lot I'd quietly purchased just 6 months ago. So while Karen was throwing tantrums and drafting lawsuits, I was sitting on a deed that gave me ownership of the very foundation of their entire bureaucracy. I wasn't ready to use it as a weapon just yet, but I made a copy of the paperwork and slipped it into a folder labeled Phase 2. Karen thought she was finished with me. She had no clue this was just the beginning. Next time, there'd be no walls, just solid, ironclad leverage. But first, I planned to let her dig herself even deeper. After her dramatic escape from my brick prison, Karen didn't show her face for 2 full days. I assumed she was either nursing her wounds or desperately searching for a legal loophole she could wriggle through like some bureaucratic ferret. Turns out, she was doing both and simultaneously building a story. On the 3rd day, there was a sharp, business-like knock at my front door. Not a neighbor dropping off banana bread. This was all business. When I opened it, 2 sharply dressed people stood there with clipboards, their expressions like they were ready to audit my very soul. The woman introduced herself as a member of the HOA's Legal Advisory Committee. The man said nothing but began taking notes as he looked past me into my house. I crossed my arms and leaned against the door frame, waiting. They informed me the HOA had filed an internal report accusing me of obstructing community access. improperly using private space for personal confinement, and endangering a board member. I nearly laughed out loud. Apparently, Karen had spun her 3-hour nap in my recliner into a full-blown hostage crisis. She claimed I'd locked her inside without food, water, or ventilation, conveniently ignoring the multiple bottles of water, emergency snacks, and 6 cameras that captured every moment of her tantrum. When I offered to show them the footage, they declined, saying the matter was already under review. That's when it hit me. The HOA wasn't just back in Karina, they were scared of her. The kicker came at the end of their visit. The woman handed me an envelope and said, "This is a notice of intent to annex." According to her, the HOA was moving forward with plans to absorb my property into the community jurisdiction, pending a vote and land reassessment. I took the envelope, stared at it, then smiled. They'd just handed me the rope they'd be hanging themselves with. I thanked them politely, closed the door, and headed straight to my office. Inside the envelope was a letter so laughably weak it might as well have been written in crayon. Vague legal jargon, incorrectly cited statutes, and no signatures from anyone who actually mattered. Still, it proved that Karen had pulled the rest of the board into her delusion. They were officially on the offensive, and that was perfect because I was ready to go nuclear. Before lighting the fuse, I made one final check. I called my cousin Danny, a land use attorney who could find loopholes in a submarine manual and seal them airtight. I sent her scans of the annexation notice, my property deeds, the HOA charter, and the incident footage. She called back 20 minutes later, laughing so hard she could barely speak. Confirmed my suspicions. The HOA had no authority to annex anything without county approval, and their charter specifically excluded properties built before 1985 that hadn't opted in. Mine was built in 1978, and I'd never signed a single HOA agreement. Karen's whole plan was a fantasy, but Danny spotted something else. She told me to check the coordinates of the HOA office building against the plat map for the neighboring lot. I did, and sure enough, about 15 feet of their building at a back wall, server room, and vacuumita sat on the lot I'd quietly purchased. Danny nearly choked on laughter again. If I wanted to end this, I could serve them with a cease and desist and force them to vacate that part of their office. I told her I had something even better in mind. Going public. I printed 50 flyers titled "Did the HOA try to annex your property? Read this." I plastered them everywhere: local coffee shops, gas stations, community bulletin boards. The flyers linked to the website I'd created, now loaded with updated documents, timelines, and Karen's infamous next-door rant, preserved forever. The video footage was front and center, along with a red highlighted section of the HOA charter proving they were violating their own bylaws. But the real showstopper was a satellite image showing the HOA building overlapping my land, with color-coded lines and a big arrow pointing to the server room labeled. Within 2 days, the story exploded. Local blogs picked it up, neighborhood parents started sharing it on Facebook, and a retired judge just 2 streets over emailed me directly, saying, "If they so much as breathe another word about annexation, I'll represent you pro bono in court." But the best moment came on a rainy Thursday morning when Karen herself returned, this time with a camera crew in tow. I was sipping coffee on my porch when I saw her striding up the walkway, dressed in a bright red blazer like she was starring in her own infomercial. Behind her, 2 guys carried boom mix and a woman held a DSLR camera. Karen marched right up to my front steps and began addressing the camera confidently, claiming I'd created an unsafe environment, was targeting her personally, and inciting anti-HOA sentiment throughout the neighborhood. I waited for her to pause, then stood and casually asked her camerawoman if they wanted better lighting. The woman laughed nervously. Karen's face turned redder than her blazer. I said nothing, raised no voice. I simply walked over to the side gate and taped a laminated copy of the county plat map and my deed right to the fence. Then I held up a laminated sign that read, "I own the land under your server room." The camerawoman zoomed in without hesitation. Karen tried to block the shot, but it was too late. By the time she stomped off again, the footage was already making the rounds online. Someone had edited it with dramatic music and titled it, "HOA Boss Gets Schooled on Her Own Front Lawn." That very night, the HOA held another emergency meeting, and this time, The minutes leaked. The notes revealed that half the board members were ready to oust Karen. Apparently, several had warned her not to escalate things with me and were now scrambling to distance themselves. One anonymous board member even emailed me, thanking me for exposing the power grab and saying the HOA had become more about fear and fines than community upkeep. The email came with attachments, internal emails from Karen's account showing she'd been pushing the board to revise the home app to include my property without notifying me. She'd even called it the workshop acquisition plan. I didn't release the emails right away. I wanted to let them stew. Let Karen keep spinning her version while the real story quietly gained traction. I updated the website one last time with a countdown timer labeled Property Truth Bomb Incoming, set to expire at the exact hour of the next official HOA town hall meeting. To make sure it got noticed, I slipped flyers under every HOA member's windshield. No insults, no threats, just facts. Karen had declared war through bureaucracy. I was just better at playing it. As the timer ticked down, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation. People whispered at the farmer's market, in coffee shops, and grocery lines. The town hall was scheduled for 6 p.m. on a Friday, a time the HOA deliberately chose, hoping for a low turnout. They expected folks would be too busy winding down, going out to dinner, or collapsing on their couches to show up for another dull meeting about shrub heights and mailbox paint. But this time, the parking lot was full an hour before the doors even opened. The room was packed to people standing along the walls, others sitting cross-legged on the floor, all eager to witness what they believed would be the final chapter in the Karen saga. The timer on my website had stirred up a storm the HOA never expected. Even the mayor's assistant was there, sitting in the back row with phone in hand, recording. I walked in casually, a folder under my arm and a travel mug of coffee in hand, nodding at neighbors who greeted me with thumbs up and knowing smirks. Karen was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by board members who looked more like hostages than participants. She wore this time. Karen showed up wearing a pale pink blazer, a clear attempt to appear softer and more professional than the fire engine red disaster she'd worn during her last press stunt. Her smile was tight and forced. When she saw me walk in, she flinched just a little, and that alone made the trip worthwhile. The meeting started like any other, a few routine announcements, budget updates, then Karen launched into a speech so full of spin it could have doubled as a washing machine cycle. She talked about community unity, respect for shared spaces, and the need to update jurisdictional boundaries for fairness. She never once said my name or mentioned the workshop incident outright, but everyone in the room knew exactly who and what she meant. She finished by calling for a board vote to approve annexation of certain adjacent lots and jurisdictional ambiguity, a phrase so vague it might have come from a fortune cookie. The room shifted uncomfortably. A couple of members stared at their shoes. One guy, Steve, even coughed to break the silence. Karen looked around expectantly, clearly waiting for someone to back her motion. Before anyone could speak, I raised my hand. Heads turned toward me like I'd just stood up in church and challenged the preacher to a debate. Karen tried to ignore me, but the board chair reluctantly recognized me. I stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. Before you vote on annexing land that doesn't belong to you, I think it's only fair you have the facts. I handed out copies of the documents to each board member and held up the county-approved plat map. My voice was calm, clear, and loud enough for everyone to hear. This map clearly shows my workshop sits entirely outside HOA jurisdiction. Next, I passed around the deed, notarized and dated, with no HOA liens, clauses, or references. Then I handed out satellite photos showing the HOA building encroaching 15 feet onto the lot I'd purchased. You want to annex my land, I said, but technically your HVAC system is squatting on mine. Karen tried to interrupt, accusing me of theatrics, claiming I was derailing a legitimate discussion with grandstanding. I didn't respond. Instead, I handed the final set of documents to the board chair, emails from Karen's account detailing her plan to expand the HOA's footprint by quietly altering public records and pushing votes through during low-attendance meetings. One email called me a problematic landholder, another described my workshop as a future storage facility to be repurposed once annexed. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of fluorescent lights and the clink of a water bottle hitting the tile floor. Steve, the coughing board member, flipped through the pages, then looked up, stunned. He asked Karen point-blank if she'd written those emails. She tried to dodge, claiming the emails were taken out of context or that she'd been brainstorming, but by then, nobody was buying it. The audience murmured louder and louder until the board chair slammed his gavel and called for order. Right then, a younger board member moved to suspend the annexation vote and launch an internal investigation into Karen's conduct. Another member added a motion to temporarily suspend Karen from her duties while the investigation proceeded. The vote was held and for the first time in recent memory, Karen didn't have the numbers. The tally was 5 in favor, 2 against, and 1 abstention. Karen's smile disappeared. Her face turned the color of an undercooked beet. She didn't wait for the meeting to end. Grabbing her purse, she stormed out, brushing past me without a glance. The meeting wrapped up shortly after. People spilled into the parking lot, buzzing with conversation as some congratulating me, others shaking their heads at how wild things had gotten. I kept it low-key, nodding and thanking folks for coming, then made my way home. That night, I updated the website again. The top banner now read, "Workshop secured, HOA contained." Beneath it, I posted a full timeline, every document I'd used, and a calm narrated video recap ending with a quote from the HOA Charter about respecting private property. Over the next few days, the fallout spread like wildfire. Karen's removal became the talk of the town. Several news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a case of local government overreach versus grassroots resistance. Memes flooded social media. Someone photoshopped Karen's face onto a medieval castle wall with the caption, "Fortified, but not justified." The town hall video racked up over 1 million views in just a week. Even my cousin Danny started getting calls from people wanting her to represent them in their own battles against their hoes. She joked we should start a business called Brick and Law. But the most satisfying moment came quietly. One afternoon, I got a letter not from the HOA, but from a board member who'd voted in my favor. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you for standing up when the rest of us were too scared to. We're fixing things now." There was even a gift card to the hardware store. I laughed so hard I almost dropped it. I kept working in my shop every day, just like always. The wall we built was long gone, but its story lingered etched into neighborhood lore. Kids would ride by on their bikes and ask if that was the place where the lady got walled in. I just nodded and said, "Sort of." The real wall, though? It was paper thin made of bylaws, lies, and a little too much misplaced confidence. Karen didn't disappear completely. She kept a low profile for a while, then quietly moved to another neighborhood across town. Word was she tried to join another HOA board but was politely told there were no open seats. Her reputation seemed to follow her like a shadow she couldn't shake. For the rest of us, life settled down. The HOA became more transparent, meetings better attended, and the ridiculous fines stopped altogether. 3 weeks after the town hall that cracked the Karen fortress wide open, the neighborhood finally felt normal again. The air was lighter, conversations no longer carried that tense undertone of HOA dread. For the first time in years, neighbors actually smiled at each other during evening walks. The board, now under new leadership, publicly apologized for their role in the attempted annexation, citing confusion, pressure, and as one awkwardly put it, overexposure to Karen. They repealed absurd regulations, erased pending fines, and even announced an open-door policy for future decisions. In a strange way, Karen's reign of terror forced a community reset. But despite the calm, I wasn't finished. There was one last loose end to tie up, one final nail to hammer in hard enough to echo through home meetings for the next decade. I waited for the perfect moment. Karen, though disgraced, hadn't gone fully silent. She'd retreated into her echo chamber, trying to rewrite history in small, petty bursts. On niche forums and moderated comment threads, she cast herself as the victim of cyberbullying, claiming I'd rallied a mob to ruin her reputation and legacy. Of course, she never mentioned trespassing, the emails, or the ridiculous power grab that started it all. She just couldn't let it go, and that was fine by me. It meant I had one last chance to make the lesson permanent. I reached out to the local news station that had covered the story before and offered them something exclusive. They jumped at it. The story had already brought record engagement, and the chance to run a follow-up with new evidence and a bigger payoff was like throwing me to wolves. I sent them the full unedited email thread to all of Karen's messages about the secret annexation plan, every lie she told the board, every instruction she gave to manipulate boundaries and reclassify private land as community property. Nothing was taken out of context. I also included anonymous testimonies from board members who admitted to being pressured or intimidated by Karen during her reign. The piece aired on a Thursday evening, right in prime time. Titled HOA Power Grab, Secrets Behind the Workshop Wall, it opened with drone footage of my workshop, then cut to clips from the town hall, overlaid emails, and interviews with residents who'd had their own run-ins with Karen. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about everyone she'd wronged. People fined for imaginary violations, bullied into silence, or forced to comply with bogus codes just to avoid conflict. The broadcast ended with a simple question from the anchor: who protects the community when the rules are used as weapons? By the next morning, the fallout had spread to every corner of town. Karen's attempts to rebuild her image completely fell apart. She was removed from every community forum she hadn't already been banned from. Her remaining allies, now toxic by association, either resigned from the HOA or issued frantic public apologies. The property across town where she'd relocated sent her a formal warning, telling her not to interfere with association matters unless she was an elected official, which, by then, was never going to happen again. Karen had become a living cautionary tale. Still, I wasn't bitter. Not really. The whole ordeal had grown into something bigger than revenge. It became a very public lesson in what happens when ego meets resistance. Truth be told, I didn't hate Karina, I pitied her. She'd become so obsessed with control that she couldn't see a community as a group of individuals. To her, it was all a chessboard. But she forgot one crucial rule: the pawns talk, and when they talk enough, even the queen can fall. To commemorate the saga, I decided on something tangibly absurd, symbolic, and impossible to ignore. I took the very first brick from the wall we built, still resting in my shop with mortar clinging to its sides, and mounted it on a wooden plaque. Below, I engraved a metal plate that read, "In grateful memory of HOA Karen's temporary residence. May she never return." I hung it above the workshop door, the very spot where she'd insisted I was violating shared space rules. Every visitor who came in laughed when they saw it. Even the UPS guy took a selfie with it one day and asked if he could post it online. I said, "Go right ahead." For closure, I threw a barbecue, not just any barbecue, but a full community cookout. I invited every neighbor within 10 blocks, rented a bounce house for the kids, set up tables with fresh lemonade, and booked a local band to play in the backyard. The whole event was themed around freedom from HOA tyranny. I called it Workshop Independence Day. Dave, naturally, took charge of the grill. He showed up wearing an apron that read "Brick by Brick" and spent the afternoon retelling the wall story to anyone who asked. Neighbors brought dishes, shared stories, and laughed about their own absurd HOA experiences. One woman told me she'd once been fined for leaving Christmas lights up past January 2nd. Another man said he was ordered to repaint his fence because it was 2 shades too brown. For the first time, neighbors who used to wave only in passing were having real conversations. We bonded over the relief of no longer living under a microscope. It felt less like a barbecue and more like the restoration of common sense. As the sun set and the last burgers were eaten, I stood up and thanked everyone for coming. I told them that while the workshop wall had been built with bricks, the real foundation of this story was the power of people saying no and no to nonsense, no to overreach, no to fear of speaking up. The crowd clapped and laughed, and someone yelled out, "Long live the workshop." It was cheesy, but in that moment, it felt well deserved. That night, after everyone had gone home and the yard was littered with folding chairs and empty lemonade cups, I sat alone on the porch with a glass of scotch. I looked over at the workshop, its lights still glowing softly like a quiet engine of resilience. It had always been my place of peace, my escape from the noise of the world. I never imagined it would become the heart of a neighborhood rebellion. But sometimes, the fight finds you whether you want it or not. The trick is deciding how you respond. I chose bricks. And as strange as it sounds, those bricks gave me more than a wallet. They gave me back my space, my community, and the absolute certainty that no clipboard-wielding tyrant would ever walk through my door again without an invitation. In the weeks that followed, things finally settled into a new rhythm. The host stopped harassing people. Board meetings shifted from courtroom dramas into polite discussions about landscaping budgets and neighborhood watch schedules. Neighbors volunteered for cleanup days, helped repaint fences, and mowed lawns together. It was everything an HOA should be: helpful, supportive, and invisible when needed. I didn't attend every meeting, but I was always invited, always welcome, and that was enough.